We've been going through a series called the I Am series, and we've been talking about different I Am statements of Christ and how He is proclaiming to the people who are listening to Him that He is God. And so we've already learned about Christ being our bread of life. He gives us our fill. That even when our souls are just so hungry for something more, when we listen and let Him in and let Him be this God, that He is our bread of life and He fills us up. And there's nothing that gives us more sustenance than Christ. Then we learned about Him being the light of the world. And that through the darkness that this world brings, He gives us life that comes through His light. And then we learned about Him being the gate. And that He opens the door. He protects us. He protects His sheep. He allows us to go to and from to green pastures. He's our good shepherd. That He came so that we can have life and that we can live it to the full. And He guides us and protects us and gets us to where we need to be. And we've learned that Christ is so great. And He is all of these things, but He gives us a choice. And we have a choice to follow. We have a choice to enter. We have a choice to be in the light as He is in the light so that we can have fellowship with one another. And that the love of Christ covers our sins when we do these things. And it's such an awesome thing to be part of His family. But today, we get an even better promise. An eternal promise. And that's when we learn that Christ says, I am the resurrection and the life. So I always kind of say that my love language is ESPN, because if you use sports analogies, I just get it. But I have like a second love language, and it's movies. And you know, when my friends and I would get together, the things that we do the most is we talk about movie lines and sports. And we try to trick each other to see if we can get it. And we play games like, what are these actors most famously known for? Different things like that. Movies, they resonate with me. So I'm going to mention 3 movies with hopes that you've seen them or heard of them at least. The first one is Back to the Future. It's that 1980s film starring Michael J. Fox as Marty McFly, who drives in a sweet DeLorean back and forth between 1955 and back to 1985. The other one is Groundhog's Day. Bill Murray plays a reporter, weatherman goes out, and it's great because today's Groundhog's Day, isn't it? So he goes out to Punxsutawney and relives February 2nd over and over and over again. And the third movie is a movie called Sliding Doors. Maybe some of you haven't seen that one. It's not as famous. Gwyneth Paltrow keeps trying to get on her tube in London and keeps missing her train because the doors close in front of her. And throughout the movie, you're going to find out what happens over and over again when she misses the door, but then what happens when she finally gets through and makes it. And a lot of these films have a similar thing or something that brings them all together. And it's this fantasy about reliving days. Altering the past. Going back and fixing things. And I think at one point or another we have all had that moment where we wish we could have went back and changed something. Where we wish we could have went back and fixed something and made it right. And this happens especially when you've lost somebody. Where you wish you can go back and you can change things and you can fix it so that they'd still be here. I wrote this and planned for this well before the events that happened for me and losing a friend. And I wrote it thinking, this is good stuff. And then when I went back and read it, I was like, this is sad stuff. Because we do something in life as people, and we're going to learn this in a second, because Martha did this as well. It's this phrase that we start to say, and it's called, if only. If only. And you start to say things like, if only he wouldn't have went to work that day. Or for us, if only I would have talked to him one more time. Or if only he ate better. If only, there's so many things that we say that we wish we could change. If only this would happen, then you would still be around. Or if only this would happen, I would feel better. And we say this over and over again because it makes us think, well, if that would happen, I would just feel great. But you know what happens when we say those things? We get stuck in it. We get stuck in a feeling. Martha, when she hears that Jesus is coming because her brother had died, she had already sent word to Christ, or to Jesus, and let him know, hey, Lazarus is ill. You need to come. He's not doing well. In the grief of Lazarus' family, as we look in the beginning of chapter 11, you start to see the pain that his family had. So Lazarus was relatives to Martha and Mary, and he was really a good friend of Jesus too. And he was ill, and he wasn't doing well. And Jesus decides to sit with his disciples a couple extra days. And when he finally goes, hey, it's time to go, our friend Lazarus is dead. They're like, well, why are we going anyways? And he gets there. Mary decides to stay. She's probably upset. And I don't really want to talk to Jesus right now. But Martha goes out, and these are the words that she says to Jesus. Well, I'll read it from the beginning. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. And she goes to him, and you can feel the emotion when she says this. I don't think she said this in a whisper. Lord, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Do you ever feel that emotion? If you would have just done this, you wouldn't have, the anger, the sadness. But then she goes and follows it with, but I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. You can feel the tension, but also the love, but also the sadness. I had already told you. I told you he was sick. You should have. It was only 2 miles away. Why weren't you here? You should have been here. We say these things over and over again with the idea, this nostalgia that we have is a bittersweet feeling, caressing a moment that we might have been while knowing it was all fantasy. If I just think about it, I know this could still happen. And we live in a denial, and we live in this stage. But through this if-only moment, where we struggle through it, and we struggle through this idea of just saying, you should have been there, we have a conversation. And this is what is so great about Christ. In our darkest time, our saddest time, and our frustration, we have a moment where we have this conversation, and he starts to shed light on a situation. A light that is so much bigger than what we could have seen, because we're living in a temporary, small window of what we see with our own eyes. And Christ has such a bigger picture. And he gives us this in a conversation that he has with Martha. He starts to do this thing where, so in this passage, Jesus and Martha have a conversation that indicates that Back to the Future idea isn't entirely a movie maker's fantasy. He starts to bring it to life, and he brings future to present. And this is what he says. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Do you ever have someone tell you something after something difficult happens and you really don't want to hear it? Yes. It's kind of like that idea that you're struggling through something and they give you the line that, well, God only gives things to people who are strong enough to handle it. Do you ever hear that? And do you ever say it to somebody? If you have, I'm going to tell you, don't do it. Wait. Let them grieve through a little bit. Because it's hard for us to hear some words sometimes because we're still struggling in our grief and in our pain. And so Jesus says, hey, don't worry about it. Your brother's going to rise again. And you can tell that she's sitting there going, he's been dead for 4 days. I mean, I know you're Jesus and everything. But she doesn't say that. She actually has a really strong faith. And she says something like, yeah, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on that last day. And she can feel this, and I'm glad for him. And I know where he's at. And I know that he lived a life and he believed in God and that he believed in you. And I know where he will be. But it doesn't help me feel better right now. But I'm thankful for that. He lived a good life. But this is cool. Because this is a moment where Jesus gets to bring the future and he brings it smack dab right into the present. Just like in the movie Sliding Doors or Groundhog Day or Back to the Future, sometimes it's not so easy for us to get our heads wrapped around the idea. And as we're watching it, you get confused and maybe you have to replay it a bunch of times to see, like, how is this going to work out? And maybe throughout you play it several times before you really get the meaning. And then when you feel like you have most of it together, maybe you won't get the full meaning until the end of the show, where it all comes together. And then you go, oh, that just makes so much more sense. I wish I would have known that from the beginning. So Jesus' response to her "if only you would have been here" statement is, don't worry, he will rise again. He points Martha in her grief to the future. It's like saying to somebody, it's okay, the movie all turns out fine in the end. It's going to be all right. And she says, yeah, I get it. And I'm pleased for him. But what do we do now? How do we cope now? How do we get through what we're going through now? And Jesus brings the future to the present. I know he's coming back in that last day, and I'm hanging on to that promise, and it's all that gets me through. But Jesus says you don't have to wait for the last day. You don't have to wait for that resurrection day, because guess what? I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? And Back to the Future, where Marty McFly's time machine car shoots across the screen in an attempt to enter 1985 to get back to the future, Jesus makes a statement to Martha that changes everything and accelerates the future to the present. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. I know you're waiting for that last resurrection day, but guess what? I am that resurrection. I am that day. The day where all will rise and we will all come back and we live. And we have life. The Message paraphrases this, and I love how the Message puts things sometimes, and this is what it says. You don't have to wait for the end. I am, right now, resurrection and life. It's the future that is crashing and breaking into this present huge bang. And we start to have to think about a few things of what we view resurrection to be. So resurrection is a doctrine, yes. A belief that we hold with theories attached that can be debated. Resurrection is a future promise, yes. It's something that we hold on for loved ones and we hold on to for ourselves. But resurrection is a person? Is resurrection really a person? We're face to face again with one of those I am statements. Another one of them where Jesus comes out and is letting us know, I am. I am God. I am this life and this resurrection that you've been waiting for. And I can give life. We sing the song from time to time. I don't know if we sang it in a while. Youth group sing it a lot. We sing the song that says, He came from heaven to earth to show the way. All right, we sang those words and we said, but He's done a lot more than that. Now I want us to get this idea, this picture that He came from our future destination. He came from the place of perfection. The place where everything is great and happy and perfect and is what we want to be. And He was willing to come down to earth. In the mud and the muck of this world, full of sin and struggle. Things aren't what we want it to be. And He was willing to be here. Now think about this for a moment. He knew where Lazarus was going. He could have just said, He's in heaven. Be happy with that. But He needed them to see who He was and what God was using Him to be. And so at a moment, He sits there and He says, I am the resurrection and the life. And as He looks at this tomb where He's been sitting, and He says, it's about time to roll this stone away. Martha goes, and Mary, it's going to smell in there. He's been dead for a while. I don't think we should do that. And Jesus seeing their struggle and their heartache, we have that great famous verse, that's one of the smallest verses in the Bible, John 11:35, where Jesus weeps. It says Jesus wept. But you would think, why is He crying about it when He knows He's going to raise Him from the dead and He knows everything's going to work out and it's going to be fine? Well, guess what? He's going to raise Him from the dead on an earthly terms where He's going to die again. And He's still a man. He still sees people's pain and He still sits with them in that and has compassion for them. And He loved this man who passed away. And the sadness comes from us seeing how temporary this life is. And it's not a you will live forever kind of a life here on this earth. And that saddens God because that's not what He made us for. It made us to be. But there is a great hope and a promise. And that great hope and promise is I am the resurrection and I am the life. And just like I came to this earth, and I'm sitting through all of this struggle, and yes, I'm going to raise Lazarus out of the dead, and he's going to come out of that tomb wrapped in cloths that are meant for people who have died. There's going to be a time, and this is pointing to it, where I'm going to sit on a cross, and I am going to die. But when you get to my tomb, and you roll that tombstone away, the grave clothes are going to be folded nice and neat, and I'm not going to be there because I have power over death. And I have a future promise. But I can make that future promise present for you as well. So what do we do, and how do we get through all of these different things? Well, the first thing is we have to understand that there's a cost to it. There's a cost to following Christ, and there's a cost to being His chosen children, people who are going to bring out His Word. And there's a cost of living here on this earth right now, and that is death. There's one thing we all have in common, and we've talked about this a lot, and it's kind of one of those things I don't want to leave us depressed on, but leave us excited about who our God is. And so here's our cost of being here in this world, and one thing that we all have in common: we're all at some point born, and at some point in our lives, we're going to have a final day. The number in between is not guaranteed for what we get to live it out to be. We get to choose that dash, that moment where we get to relive this life from our start date to our end date and live it to serve and to glorify God, or we can live it to serve and glorify ourselves. For Lazarus, following God and being on this world, it cost him his life. If we read on through the gospel that we talked about before, raising Lazarus and showing that he was truly this God marked a big stamp on Jesus' head. Because after that, they went out and they plotted they were going to kill Jesus. So Jesus had the cost of raising his friend from the dead, which was going to cost his own life too. And maybe some of those tears that he shed were also tears of knowing that when I go to visit Lazarus, and when I go put myself out there, when I go and show them all who I really am and what God sent me to do, I know the consequence is going to be my life. And even though he was God and knew that that's what he was called for, he was still man, and that had to be a struggle and a sadness that I'm coming to give life even though it's going to cost me a life. But only I can give up my life. We learned that last time. So we hear all this information and we hear what's going on, and I got to end with this. What is the so what? What do we do with it? How does that work for us? Is Christ going to come and raise us out of the dead when we die? But there's a present to it too. Maybe you've already been struggling and you've been dead with your own spiritual life. He's ready to raise that out of the dead too. Maybe you've been struggling with this idea that you have your own insecurities. He's ready to raise you out of that too. Maybe the person that you've been struggling with that you haven't been offering forgiveness to because you are so resentful and you don't want to do it, He's ready to raise you up out of that too. See, Christ gives us this idea that I am the resurrection and the life, and it has nothing to do completely with the fact that you're going to die and yes, you're going to raise and He's going to take you to heaven. There is a long journey along the way that He is constantly raising you out of. And the same Spirit that God gave to raise Christ out of the grave, He's giving to us every day to raise us out of our own world issues. The worries of this life about how much money I'm going to have, what I'm going to wear, or the struggles of paying a mortgage or my marriage or my relationship or whatever it might be for you, He's ready to raise you up out of it and give you a better perspective of your life. And He tells you every day, I died for you. Now what are you going to do today? I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. He came and He died for all of us. That's a good tension breaker. Because it would get a little intense. Oh, you're okay. You're okay. Dwayne is not here, so you will not get fined. This is a good time to show love. Forgive me. And God will raise you up out of that too. So what? What are you going to choose to do when you leave here today? And if we're blessed and get to wake up tomorrow, what are you going to choose to do then? Will we acknowledge the fact that we have a Savior that was willing to die and raise us up, and that we need to live a raised up life? Or are we willing to sit in our own darkness, sitting in our own grave, wrapped in our grave cloths that are binding us to what we can and can't do. These are our choices. This is our life. And God gave it to us. And as we learned when He was our good shepherd, He gave us this life so that we can live it to the fullest. He wants you to enjoy it. Does that mean everything is going to be roses and perfect for you? It may not be. Does that mean we're going to struggle through loss of loved ones? Yes. Does it mean that we're going to have the ups, the joys of being chosen children, that we see God's blessings through the sunrise, through our kids, through whatever it may be? Yes, and it's great. But the promise that we have is so much greater than all the things that this earth can offer. That when we get raised up by Christ, we get raised up to way better things. A life that God intended for us to be, which is perfect. So I'm going to end us with this. This is a line that Jesus asked Martha at the end of what we read this morning for our text. He tells her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. And so he asks her this, do you believe this? And I think he asks us this too. And do you believe this? And she says, yes, Lord, I believe. And this is really important because Jesus didn't raise Lazarus from the dead yet. She hadn't seen this amazing feat that was about to happen. And she looks at him and says, I believe in what you are and what you can do. And if you choose to raise my brother from the dead or not, I will still believe that you are a Messiah and that you are my God. What faith? So the question that you get to leave with is, do you believe this? What will your response be? When Jesus comes and He calls and He's asking on you, hey, I am a resurrection and a life, and when you believe in this, you will never die. And even if you die, you will still continue to live. Do you believe this? I will ask you, do you believe this? And if you say no, it's not a bad answer. It just means that you want more discussion about what Christ is in your life. And so I don't want you to feel leaving saying, well, maybe I don't believe this fully yet. But if that's where you are, we should have a conversation. And it's not about a judgment of oh, you need to read the Bible more. It's more like, I would love to show you how much Christ has in store for your life. And what He's already done presently for your life. That He loved us just at the right time, even while we were still sinners. And He came and He died for us. But He didn't just die in vain. He rose so that we can live too. And I want you all to live a life to the fullest. Let's go to God in prayer. Dear Father, Lord, we are so grateful to be your children. We are so grateful that you would come to this world that would reject you. That would rather live in darkness than live in your light. But that you loved us enough and you had hope enough for us that we would choose you. And this group of people are here because you called them here. I pray that we continue to choose you. And that you raise us from what we struggle with every day. And help us to see your glory every day. And that we can leave the past that we've struggled with behind us and keep striving for that future goal, which is the promise that you gave us through your Son, that we get to live eternity with you in heaven. Just like you rose Lazarus out of the grave and said, come out. I pray that you help us to come out of the lives that we've been living too. The lives that we have that lead to death. And start living a life that leads to life. By giving our trust, our faith, and our belief that you are our Messiah. That you clean up our mess. That you went to your Father and said, I want them here with me. And they are worth dying for. And I thank you for that gift. And I thank you for that promise. Praise you.